I don't know about you, but I don't typically sleep the recommended number of hours every day. The CDC recommends 8 to 10 hours for teenagers and 7 or more for adults. 1/3 of US adults sleep less than 7 hours. 62% of teenagers sleep less than 8 hours. And 40% less than 7 hours. Now I don't know about you, but that seems a bit less than the recommended amount. So why is this? Why do so many people, especially teenagers, not sleep enough? Well, that's what I want to find out in this video. So I know what you're thinking. These things. These things emit a bunch of blue light, which is what keeps you from falling asleep because your body doesn't release enough melatonin and therefore you don't feel sleepy. But from the studies I read, blue light doesn't actually seem to be enough to lead to this large disparity between how much sleep we should and are getting. So if there's more to it than quitting Netflix and playing games at 1 in the morning, then what is it? So one of the first reasons that I came up with when I was researching this and asking some friends about what they might think is that they said it was about being cool, about sleep deprivation, not sleeping enough, bragging about only having slept 5 hours yesterday, 4 hours yesterday, 3 hours. That's like a thing of being cool. But the more I looked into it, I've realized that maybe this bragging isn't really the cause that people do it. It's just that people don't sleep enough and then brag about not sleeping enough because, hey, that's like a cool thing to do. So what is then this cause? Well, I found two main things. First of which is having a crowded schedule. If we think of how an average day of a teenager looks like, or I may as well just explain how an average day of my life looks like, I wake up in the morning and I go to school, which I'm there for I think 6.5 hours until I go home in the afternoon. I spend some time doing homework, studying, revising, along with, socializing, having fun, eating, relaxing, doing all these things before I go to sleep in the evening, ready for the next day. If we think of this in reverse, you've got 24 hours a day, of which 9 is going to sleep, so that would be 15 hours remaining. With 15 hours, you then have around 6.5 hours of school, which would be 8.5. Let's then add maybe an hour or so of going to and from school, which puts us at 7.5. Now let's add studying, which for me being in 6th form, they recommend 15 to 20 hours a week on all of my subjects, which equals out to about 2.5 hours a day. I forgot what number we are. I think we're at 5 hours now. Let's then remove maybe half an hour for dinner, an hour for socializing or whatever. And you will find that you will have some hours left in a day, but what we've been describing so far has really been like a perfect day. Like you go to school, finished, immediately doing studying, finished, immediately, no one's perfect. And there's also this thing called procrastination, which certainly aids in making things take a bit longer than you initially planned them to. And with a busy schedule like this, with a lot of things that you have to do, mixed in with also a bunch of things that you really want to do and therefore will do, there's a reason why some people decide, hey, this sleep thing, maybe we'll just trim a little bit off the end of it, just like a little bit, and then have more time for other things, and that'll be great. I forgot my notes. I want to look back at mobile phones, not necessarily for the blue light, but just like the time spent on mobile phones, because surprise, surprise, there used to be a time without mobile phones. So, studies should show that, since probably around 2009, since around then, that if mobile phones are a large contributing reason to teens not sleeping enough, that teens should, since that point when mobile phones were invented, should not sleep enough. And a study by AJMC in 2015 found that 40% of teens slept less than 7 hours, which is 58% higher than in 1991, which is quite a lot, but 17% higher than 2009. Which isn't as large of an increase, although we should also remember that this was 2015 and we're now in 2021. But what it shows is that this is more of a continuing trend, because in 1991 it was 58% lower than now. 2009, 17% lower. It's a line. It's getting worse. But yeah, But hey, let's go back to the two things that I was talking about. We had busy schedules, and now we're going to talk about the start of school. I remember when I was 7 and living in Germany, and my school started at 7:50, and I remember waking up at like 6:30, getting ready, and then walking to school really early. But 7:50, that's pretty early. For example, the school that I go to now starts about an hour later at 8:45, which is a big difference. But what does this difference even mean? Well, my camera decided to overheat because it's really warm in this room, but let's just continue. So, one high school in 1997. What happened? Well, they changed the time at which their school started from 7:20 until 8:40. They were the first school to do this, and a lot of people were skeptical, especially when they were told that it was supposed to help teenagers with their, their sleep, their health, their what? How? But after a year, they decided in a vote to not switch back to 7:20, and also in a survey to the parents, they found that 92% of parents said their kids were easier to deal with. By 2005, around 250 high schools decided to make the switch, and nowadays it's a lot more common for schools to start around 8 or 9 rather than around 7. And the science is in. The later school starts, the higher the percentage of students who actually sleep the recommended number of hours every night, going from 49.7% at 8 o'clock to 66% at 8:55. It significantly reduced absences, tardiness, sleepiness, smoking and alcohol consumption, caffeinated beverages, and teen car crashes, because this is the US, so teens drive cars. But most importantly, teens didn't measurably go to sleep later with later school start times. Meaning that when school started later, most people didn't decide to just stay up longer and go to sleep later. So I think the next thing that we should cover is sleep for teenagers. Hey, what? Sleep for teenagers? What is he now on about? So it turns out that sleep is a little bit different for teenagers, and it's all got to do with your circadian rhythm, which you've probably heard of it, but it's the thing that controls whether you feel awake or whether you feel sleepy. In the evening when it gets dark, your body starts producing melatonin, and over a couple of hours that then makes you sleepy, which also explains why some people feel really sleepy in the winter when it gets dark really early. But one thing is that during puberty, your circadian rhythm shifts back by a couple of hours, which it isn't just teenagers being lazy or actually wanting to stay up all night, it's because we're just not sleepy yet. And apparently it's also a disorder, which I don't know if you're trying to say something there, scientists, but that's kind of rude. But what this means is that instead of feeling sleepy at around 10 o'clock or so, you feel sleepy towards midnight, and you can't really see it, but one of the lines here you'll see is generally no sleep problems if allowed to maintain the desired sleep-wake schedule. Now if you think back to about 2 minutes ago when we talked about school starting at 7:20, you'll realize that those two things don't really work together. But let's look back at the big picture of everything that we've talked about so far. So we've talked about blue light exposure from screens, we've talked about not having enough time in a day, and also having to wake up too early. So what's the verdict, and how is sleep deprivation cool? Well, I'm gonna have to break it to you. Sleep deprivation isn't really cool, but it is a good title for a video. So, but I think the advice that I have for you is going to be really boring because it's advice that you already know, which is to maintain a good sleep schedule. But I can give you some tips for that, because saying, hey, I want to sleep at this time, wake up at this time, is a little bit more difficult if you don't actually go to sleep at this time and wake up at this time. So we can bring in our friend melatonin. But I thought you said that melatonin was like your enemy because it's what makes you fall asleep later. So how are we going to use that? Great question, thanks for asking. We trick your body into releasing melatonin. What causes your body to release melatonin? Well, if we get the actual words, darkness prompts the pineal gland to start production of melatonin, while light causes that production to stop. So the solution is bring darkness a little bit earlier into your evening. Now, I don't mean complete darkness, but what I do is that at around 9:30, 10 o'clock, I already get my sphere of my room to be a little bit darker, where I turn off the main light and just have my LED strip at the back, which you can't see because it's very bright in this room, and like my desk lamp on. It's already darker than usual. And this darker environment already starts your production of melatonin, especially compared to a well-lit room, which I think is really important for the most important thing with all of this, which is that, you know, when you want to fall asleep, you need to be sleepy. And to be sleepy, you need to be tired. So maintain a consistent sleep schedule that gives you enough hours to actually sleep, and use light in your favor to make that possible.